Welcome to class. I'm Trevor, and on this channel I chat all things D&D. In this video, I'm going to talk about endings. That might have been a little melodramatic. I know I've been gone for quite a while, real life got in the way, but I'm back and I'm going to make videos as often as I can. In this video, I'm going to talk about endings in the context of ending a D&D campaign. I come from the perspective of a homebrew DM. So obviously, if you're playing an adventure from a book, the ending is likely the end of the book. Although, not always. I think you can build off of that and keep playing, just make it up. But I think on like D&D social media, we spend a lot of time talking about how to begin games and a lot less time talking about ending them. Unfortunately, I think this is because a lot of D&D campaigns kind of just flutter out, but I don't think that that's the best way to do it. And I really think if you go into it knowing, whether from the beginning or as you play through the campaign, you know when your end is coming, I think that you can make the end session a really powerful, really memorable experience for your players, and that's what I want to get across in this video. So I'm going to share 5 tips, in no particular order, for how I would suggest you end your game, or at least things to keep in mind. The first tip is that Finality is flexible. I think open communication is really important, especially when it comes to ending a campaign. Everyone needs to be on the same page. If one person thinks that their character's story is done, they might just need to roll a new character and continue playing. But everyone needs to, or almost everyone needs to agree, and I think that the only way to do that is to talk. Because for some people, open-ended conclusions are completely acceptable. And for others, they like a very clear sense of closure. Some people want to make sure that the big bad is gone forever, and others are okay if the big bad is, say, a lich that gets resurrected many years later. I think that all of that can't really be solved within the confines of the game, and it needs to be talked about outside of the game itself. Which means that communication is really a big key. Talk to your table. Whether this is at session 0, and I've heard a really good suggestion where like at session 0, you talk about how long you think this campaign is going to last. Or whenever you feel like it is a natural kind of stopping point, maybe after a particular arc or whatever. I think those conversations are really key to make sure, and this kind of leads into the second point, to make sure that people know what's coming. I think knowing what's coming is really important. It lets players make more rash decisions for their characters if they feel like it's fitting, because they know that this might be the last time or penultimate time that they're going to play these characters. And the only way to do that, again, is outside of the table. That open communication has to exist. As a matter of fact, my table, we have a habit, and I don't know if this is just me or if everybody does this. Actually, comment below if your table is the same way. I tend to play with the same group, and we talk about the next campaign before the one we're playing is even done. That sometimes catalyzes us into ending the one we're playing, because we realize that we're more excited for the new campaign than we are for the one we're currently in, which means it's probably time to wrap things up. This does mean that sometimes we don't get to 20th level. We've never actually gotten to 20th level. I think the highest we've gotten is like 13 or something. But if everyone knows what to expect, then any kind of static or headbutting or conflict is a lot easier to avoid. Next tip, find what your players enjoy the most and make sure to include that in the last couple of game sessions. If your players are really big into roleplay, give them a big gala that they have to go to and they have to schmooze a bunch of different people. If they love puzzles, check out Wally DM's channel and incorporate some of the puzzles that he has there. They're phenomenal. If they like crazy monsters, check out Dungeon Dad. His Monster of the Week series is incredible. But what I'm getting at is there are a lot of facets to this game, and you want to make sure that you touch on those high points for your table at the end of the session. You want to give them something that is memorable and something that they will really cling on to, and that varies from table to table. So I would try to keep in mind what your table is looking for. I know my players would not feel like a campaign is fully finished if they don't have a combat encounter at the end of the game. So I need to make sure that I plan a really dynamic combat encounter to end our campaign sessions. But whatever works for your table, I think is the best. Just keep that in mind. Tip number 4, and this is related to the others we've talked about, is end on a bang, not on a whimper. Don't hesitate to break the game at the end of the game. What's the stakes? It doesn't matter. I gave my players at the end of our last campaign a literal rare candy from Pokemon. Like, they leveled up and got the effects of a long rest because narratively it didn't make sense for them to long rest. But functionally, it's way more fun to go into the boss battle at full health and with new spells under your belt. I think that that's a really cool thing to do, and my players, they loved it. So don't hesitate to do things like that. I think that MCDM's action-oriented monsters are great, especially if you like doing big bads, like single big bads. As a matter of fact, in Flea Mortals, another MCDM, the monster book that's coming out, the Kickstarter ended relatively recently, there are rules for minions, and I've used those a lot now, and they're phenomenal. Like, I can't speak highly enough about them. As a matter of fact, if you want a review of the first preview from Flea Mortals that is available, I'm happy to do that on the channel. I think that monster book is going to be great. The minion rules were really cool because it let my players feel that power that comes with being at like 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th level. In the last game, I took it a step further, and I made sure that there were like tons of minions that they were fighting, but I used candy to represent the minions. We have actual minis, but it was way more fun to use the candy because every time they got to kill swaths of minions, they got to eat gummy worms. Like, who doesn't want to eat a gummy worm? It was great. And those things I knew would strike a chord with my players, and it made that final session feel really impactful. And that's the biggest thing. That is what you want. You want it to end on a bang and not a whimper. If you're finding these tips useful, please subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell. You can even follow me on TikTok if you use that as well. I tend to post regularly there, but I really like making this D&D content, and I know I've been gone for a while, but I would love to come back, and I'd love to create a community here. And actually, there's a link to the Discord in the description of this video, so if you want to join our Discord, please do that too. And for the fifth and final tip, consider running an epilogue. I did this in my last campaign, and I've never done it before, but I think I will from this point forward. Only one of the PCs in my group died, and it was actually not even in the final game. So these characters had been with these players, or vice versa, for a long time, and they had a lot of vested interest in these characters. And because of that, even though the narrative was over, I wanted my players to get the chance to talk about what their characters would do. And it led to some incredible moments. My wife's character, for instance, Edgar, the wizard, he was able to, throughout the narrative of our game, de-age himself. He was an old man, but he actually wasn't. It was this whole thing. And he finally got his youth back. And then he started doing some research and figuring out what his old mentor who betrayed him had done to age him in this way. And there was this moment where my wife almost like did a heel turn with Edgar, and he started to get these like flashes of evil. That's incredible. My wife is never, like, her characters are always very, very good characters, and it was just cool to see her explore that space. And that happened because we did this epilogue. I was even able to plant seeds for potential one-shots where we revisited these characters. And that's another thing to consider. I guess it's a bonus tip if you want to consider it that. I took the kind of head of the like faction that my players were following, and I had him studying the ashes of a fallen party member and studying how to venture into the underworld and resurrect this character. That was a really cool way to maybe imply, hey, if you guys want to come back to these characters, if you want to play high-level characters again, why not rescue your friend? And I think it would be really fun to do that, but we're not tied to playing in this universe forever, right? So we can come back to these characters if we want, and if we don't want to, we don't have to. Those are my tips for ending a campaign. If you have tips of your own, drop them in the comments down below. And I'd love to hear your stories about the most memorable end sessions you've ever had. They could have been from campaign books, they could have been completely homebrew, but I think that that's one of the coolest things. They're so memorable. Beginnings and endings have always stuck with me. And we talk a lot about starting in taverns, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about closure. To wrap this up, as I always say, be safe, make smart life choices.